It started with a whisper, the kind that carried the weight of urgency and fear. At exactly 2:17 a.m., an encrypted message landed on the secure channel reserved only for emergencies. Hostages, northern Burkina Faso, claimed by a foreign militia. Among them, a young aid worker, a Burkinabe journalist, and 2 local women. All presumed alive. The message was tagged Code Red, and within 20 minutes, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, president of Burkina Faso, was already in uniform. "Send in the strike unit," his defense chief insisted, voice tight. "You don't need to be there in person. You're the head of state." Traoré raised his hand. Quiet, calm, absolute. "I go." "But sir, we haven't cleared the terrain. I go." Not because he didn't trust his men, but because something didn't smell right. Traoré was no stranger to deception. Since taking power, he'd dismantled more corrupt networks than most generals knew existed. France's old fingers still clung to the region. Western intelligence agencies whispered like shadows around his name. But this felt staged. So he stepped into the helicopter anyway, not because he was reckless, but because he needed to see the lie up close. The mission briefing was crisp. Too crisp. 5 hostiles, 2 snipers, satellite blind zone, no heat trails beyond 50 meters. Traoré nodded slowly. He looked at the map projected on the monitor. A small abandoned village near the Ghana border. No military value, no strategic assets, just dust. "Why take hostages there?" he asked. No one answered. The Black Falcon unit, elite commandos under his direct control, readied in silence. They didn't question his presence, because if there's one thing Traoré had proven since day one, it was that he didn't command from a distance. He led from the fire. By 4:03 a.m., they were in the air. Night goggles, radio silence. Just the sound of wind, propellers, and heavy breathing. Traoré reviewed the profiles of the supposed hostages once more. Aid worker, no last name listed. Journalist, disappeared a year ago, no confirmed sightings. Local women, vague descriptors, no tribal names, no family statements. That was the final sign. This wasn't an extraction mission. It was a setup. At 4:58 a.m., they touched down. The village was too quiet. No dogs, no children, no radio noise, no flickering fires, just dry air and tension thick enough to slice. They breached the first compound. Empty. Second? Empty. Third. Boom. Not a blast, a signal. From the tree line behind them, lasers locked on their positions. One by one, targeting dots painted the ground like fireflies. Foreign voices crackled in a language that was not local. French accented English. One phrase repeated in clipped tones, "Confirm visual. Do not engage the target. Record only." Traoré didn't blink. He stepped forward. No cover, no helmet, just eyes locked on the unseen scope, and said, clear, firm, unshaken, "You've made your mistake. Now watch it burn." Then he signaled, and the Black Falcons vanished like ghosts. What followed was not chaos, it was discipline. His team didn't fire blindly. They didn't panic. They repositioned, jammed frequencies, and set their own trap in return, the kind of tactical brilliance only soldiers trained in betrayal can deliver. Within 12 minutes, the snipers were gone. No return fire. Just silence. The foreign soldiers had disappeared like smoke. The mission log would later record it as inconclusive. But Traoré knew what it was. An assassination attempt disguised as a rescue mission. The bait? Fake hostages? The trap? Discredit him internationally. Or worse, eliminate him without fingerprints. But what they didn't count on was that he wouldn't flinch. That he expected the ambush. That he walked in not as prey, but as witness. By 7:32 a.m., The team had regrouped at a secure rural base 2 hours south of the target village. No injuries, no casualties, but no hostages either, because there never were any. Only markers, traces of movement planted by someone who wanted it to look real. Footprints staged, campfires burnt too recently, plastic packaging from brands not sold in the region. Even the dirt spoke lies. Traore sat alone in the temporary field command tent. The folder in his hands was thin, but the implications inside it were volcanic. Recovered on one of the ridge lines, a dropped headset, still warm, with encrypted French military code on the channel history. Recovered from a nearby hill, a drone casing, U.S. manufactured, serial scratched out, but unmistakably NATO grade. And on a tree? A patch. Black, torn, scorched, the emblem of Task Force Sabre. The Foreign Special Unit France had withdrawn months ago after diplomatic pressure. So why was their gear still here? Why were they still here? When he brought the evidence to his inner circle, half the room went pale. This could trigger international fallout, one general whispered. Exactly, Traore said. Sir, another added carefully, if we go public with this, we risk being branded as conspiracy theorists or worse, aggressors. Traore looked up, calm but lethal. They tried to kill a sitting head of state. He placed the headset on the table. I don't need proof that convinces them. I need truth that convinces my people. Later that day, he stood before a camera in a hidden underground bunker. No flags, no scripted speech, just raw conviction. And he spoke. Last night, foreign operatives entered Burkina soil under the guise of a hostage rescue. No hostages were found. No local rebels were encountered. But foreign surveillance drones circled above us, and foreign rifles pointed at our hearts. He paused. The weight of the moment hung in silence. This is not a statement of accusation. It is a statement of fact. We, the people of Burkina Faso, are not chess pieces. We are not a proving ground, and we are not yours to manipulate. Within hours, the broadcast was scrubbed from Western media, but it spread like wildfire across African news networks, Twitter, Telegram, and encrypted journalist forums. Burkina Faso president exposes foreign black ops trap. Traore survives assassination attempt, but by whom? Silent war in the Sahel. Who's pulling the strings? Some doubted. Others called it posturing. But in the streets of Ouagadougou, crowds gathered, not in fear, in solidarity. Men beat drums. Women sang protest hymns. Schoolchildren raised handmade signs. We stand with truth. Hands off our land. And in every alley and market, people asked the same thing. If they tried to kill him, what else have they been doing behind closed doors? That night, a private diplomatic call came from Paris. Officially, to ensure regional stability. Unofficially, a veiled warning. Captain Traore, we encourage restraint in your public discourse. Misinformation can disrupt continental harmony. His reply was cold. So can bullets aimed at my head. Then he hung up. The next morning, the French ambassador was recalled. 2 UN advisors in the capital postponed their visits, and the U.S. State Department released a neutral statement. We are committed to peace in the Sahel and stand by Burkina Faso's leadership. But no one apologized, because acknowledging the hit would mean admitting the system still colonizes, just with satellites and finance instead of flags. By the third day, the silence from the West had become its own confession. No denial, no explanation, no apology, just a vacuum. And in that silence, Africa listened. Traore's words had traveled beyond Burkina Faso, beyond the Sahel. They reached the banks of the Congo, the highlands of Ethiopia, the ports of Senegal, the youth of Nigeria, and they didn't sound like rebellion. They sounded like awakening. At the University of Dakar, a political science class canceled its lecture. The students streamed the full 43-minute speech Traore had recorded from the underground bunker. One student whispered, "He said what our presidents were too scared to say." In Addis Ababa, 2 military analysts replayed footage of the raid site and quietly confirmed. This was foreign signature, NATO fingerprints. In South Africa, a retired freedom fighter posted a single sentence online. "Thomas Sankara has returned, in spirit and in strategy." That name, Sankara, kept rising. Because Traore wasn't just a soldier, he was a student of history, and he knew if you wanted to break colonial chains, you had to name them first. So in his next speech, standing in front of a wall lined with portraits of African revolutionaries, he said it plainly. They do not assassinate bodies anymore. They assassinate futures. They do not take minerals by force. They take them by contracts written in Europe. And when we dare to break those contracts, they send planes, not with flags, but with shadows. He paused, looked into the lens, and delivered the line that lit a fire across the continent. Africa will no longer ask for permission to breathe. The backlash from Western media was immediate. Headlines: Is Burkina Faso's leader stoking extremism? Is Traore isolating his country? Concern mounts over radical rhetoric in West Africa. But it was too late. The people had already chosen the narrative. In Mali, youth groups marched carrying Traore's portrait next to Sankara's. In Ghana, a viral song sampled his speech over Afrobeat drums. In Uganda, a street artist painted a mural with the words, "We're not your frontier anymore." Meanwhile, inside the African Union, something unthinkable happened. Representatives from 7 countries requested a private summit, one that excluded all non-African observers. Unofficially, it was called the Sovereignty Circle. And at the center of that circle? Traore. In the closed-door session, he laid out what he called the 5 pillars of reclamation. 1. Resource nationalization. All foreign contracts to be re-audited publicly. 2. Military independence. Foreign military bases to be phased out within 2 years. 3. Cultural reclamation. Colonial education frameworks to be replaced with Afrocentric curricula. 4. Continental Media Union. A Pan-African satellite and news network free from Western filters. 5. Currency liberation. A slow but complete exit from the CFA franc and any colonial currency tether. The room was silent, not with fear, but with weight, because every leader knew agreeing to this meant war, not of bullets but of banking, blockades, and smear campaigns. And still, 5 heads of state nodded. Quiet. Firm back in Burkina Faso, Traore didn't celebrate. He walked the streets of Ouagadougou unguarded. He sat with farmers, teachers, mechanics. He asked what they feared. And they all said the same thing. That one day you'll disappear, like the rest. He looked them in the eye. I won't. And this time, they believed him. 1 week after the failed ambush, a letter arrived at the presidential compound in Ouagadougou. Not an email, not a call. A formal, sealed envelope, hand-delivered by a discreet diplomatic courier, stamped in gold at the top, Embassy of the Republic of France. Traore opened it without expression. Inside, an invitation. We request a private dialogue in Marseille between President Ibrahim Traoré and select representatives of the French Ministry of Foreign Affairs to discuss a framework of understanding and regional stability. Translation: We see the fire you've lit. Now we want to control it. His advisors were divided. This could be a trap, one warned. They might offer concessions, another countered. It's an opportunity to hold them accountable, face to face, someone added. Traore didn't blink. I'll go. 3 days later, he landed in Marseille under a neutral security escort. No flags, no media, just him and 3 hand-picked intelligence officers. At the compound, the French envoys greeted him with practiced smiles and cold champagne. The table was set, the cameras were off, the masks were on. The first few minutes were polite, overly so. "We respect your nation's independence, of course. We understand your recent actions are driven by patriotism. We support African-led development initiatives." Traoré listened. And then, calmly, he cut through the niceties. "You tried to kill me." The room tensed. No one denied it. Instead, the lead diplomat replied, "President Traoré, geopolitics is not a clean game. You understand that better than most." They leaned in with offers, loosened trade restrictions, development funds, satellite access for weather and defense, technical military training programs, all in exchange for de-escalation of rhetoric, temporary suspension of mining audits, regional cooperation on military presence. It was clear. They weren't offering peace. They were offering submission with better packaging. Traoré stood, didn't shout, didn't accuse, just looked them in the eye and said, "Your aid is not aid. Your partnerships are not equal, and your diplomacy is just a velvet glove over an iron fist. Burkina Faso doesn't need softer chains. We need freedom, and we'll pay the price for it, whatever it is." He turned and walked out. That night, as his plane lifted off the Marseille runway, the Western media released a statement. "Talks with Burkina Faso end without resolution. Concerns remain over increasing isolationism." But Traoré wasn't isolated. Back home, millions awaited his return. And across Africa, whispers turned into speeches, speeches into demonstrations, demonstrations into declarations. Guinea suspended military training contracts with France. Niger nationalized a key uranium mine. Chad expelled 3 foreign consultants from its central bank. The cracks were spreading. The next morning, Traoré gave a short national address. No drama, just truth. "I did not go to beg. I went to remind them. The world has changed, and Africa will not kneel again, not for loans, not for minerals, not for survival." But behind the scenes, pressure mounted. Western banks hinted at blocking funds. Anonymous sources whispered about sanctions. A foreign NGO suddenly accused the Burkinabe military of possible human rights violations. A familiar tactic. The machine had awakened. But Traoré, he was already 10 moves ahead. On African terms. It started with a simple communiqué, one that would change everything, sent from the office of the President of Burkina Faso to 27 African capitals. The subject line read, "Conference for Continental Dignity and Economic Sovereignty." Unofficially, it became known as the Black Star Conference, a direct nod to Ghana's first president, Kwame Nkrumah, and the bold vision of Pan-Africanism that colonial powers had spent decades trying to erase. The invitation was not sent through the African Union, not through the UN, not through ECOWAS, because this wasn't diplomacy as usual. It was a call to liberation, and surprisingly, or perhaps inevitably, many answered. By the second week of preparations, confirmations rolled in. Guinea, Mali, Chad, Eritrea, South Sudan, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Congo, Brazzaville, Namibia, Central African Republic. Some sent ministers, some sent presidents, some sent generals, but all sent a message. We are ready to talk about what they never wanted us to say aloud. When the day arrived, Ouagadougou Airport shut down to commercial flights. Military bands played only traditional rhythms, no Western anthems. Security was tight, but spirits were free. The conference was held in the unfinished but soon-to-be inaugurated African Renaissance Center, a building Traoré had fast-tracked just for this moment. No marble imported from Europe, no electronics built abroad, only African architecture, African minds, and African stone. Inside, the air buzzed with a kind of energy that hadn't been felt in decades. Older revolutionaries whispered, "This feels like Sankora's ghost is walking the halls again." Young journalists said, "We've never seen our leaders speak like this, unfiltered, unafraid." And at the center of it all, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, dressed not in a suit but in traditional mossy robes, earth-colored, grounded, and proud. He stepped to the podium. No paper, no teleprompter, and said,